Although the historical course is marked by the expenditure of energy and decay, what we described with the phrase "the pulsation of life" ultimately leads, despite all hardship, to something greater. For Teilhard, a Jesuit priest, the omega point is synonymous with God, and it is defined by 4 key attributes: autonomy, actuality, irreversibility, and transcendence. First, it is not the origin of evolution. It does not emerge from matter as a property of complexity. On the contrary, like a magnet that precedes it, it draws evolution toward itself. Second, it is not merely an abstract concept but a reality, the actual final state toward which evolution aspires, embodying the fullness of being and consciousness. Third, the movement toward it is irreversible. Once reflective consciousness has arisen, there is no return to instinctual or purely material states. Evolution and the development of consciousness move inexorably forward. Fourth, the omega point transcends physical laws and space-time, existing beyond them. Although it represents the force that draws the arrow of evolution, it, as essence and destination, lies beyond that very arrow. The entire process of evolution in this light can be viewed in 2 ways. First, as a cone composed of a layer of simple atoms at its base, the point of origin, and increasingly narrower parts toward the top representing higher complexity: matter, living organisms, thinking beings, and spirit. Alternatively, it can be seen as a branching structure that begins at alpha in the pre-life phase, expands throughout the zone of life, and then begins to fold in on itself during the phase of reflection, ultimately converging at the omega point in the zone of hyperreflection. In this view, the awakening of living beings, of humans, accompanied by all the doubt, unrest, anxiety, fear, compassion, and so on, compels life to unify into an ultimate intelligence that is neither personal or impersonal, but suprapersonal, and which is guided by the force of love. To cite directly, driven by the force of love, the fragments of the world seek each other so that the world may come into being. We've previously noted that these ideas also find a certain expression in the work of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Although a materialist who rejected the intervention of divine elements, the Russian pioneer of astronautics was a proponent of both monism and panpsychism. In the first case, this does not refer merely to the belief that reality is made of a single substance which rejects dualisms like spirit and matter, the living and the non-living, but also to a belief in a general cosmic tendency towards unification, toward oneness. Just as cells join to form a living being with a single center, the brain, Tsiolkovsky believed we could trace a similar unification of humans into a shared, powerful body, a state with a unified government. This leads to the conclusion of the inevitable unification of the Earth and ultimately the entire universe under the control of a superior intelligence. This arises from the aforementioned distinction between sensitivity, which characterizes all matter, and sentience, which emerges in more complex life forms. The movement of atoms thus implies a transition from a dormant to a sensory state, and the very course of cosmic evolutionary development ultimately leads to the universe becoming a conscious entity. The emergence of intelligent life is merely a manifestation of this awakening, while humanity in this framework represents no more than one of the stations on the road to the development of cosmic perfection, with science as its most potent tool. From this follow 2 beliefs. First, given the space-time dimensions of the cosmos, life undoubtedly fills galactic distances, and it is almost certain that there are complex forms of intelligent life far beyond humanity. Second, from all that has been said, one can also speculate about a kind of material immortality, reincarnation, or persistence. Since matter and consciousness are eternal and interconnected, individual personalities may endure in altered forms even after death. The continual survival of the atoms from which we are composed, their merging into sentience and dispersing into dormant sensitivity, may serve as a guarantee of that. But the question remains, why would any of this be relevant to the world of Stalker? My belief is that the very combination of ideas outlined above, which provides one possible answer to the Fermi paradox, may also offer an answer to the question, where is the sea consciousness? As disappointing as it may be, the answer for now can only be that its space-temporal location is unknowable at our current stage of development, and naturally at the current stage of all other agents in Stalker. Even though we see Strelok at the end of Shadow of Chernobyl emptying his magazine, methodically executing the physical bodies of the scientists who originally made up the sea consciousness, the same character tells us in Call of Pripyat that the people responsible for the Wish-Granter illusion are somewhere else. He speaks in terms of space as we understand it, but the monolith itself is a monument to the Omega Point, a point of unification, or, in the language of transcendent intelligent life, a point of transition. The sea consciousness exists. It is one with the zone, which represents a mode of unified being in development, as evidenced by the emissions that function like an immune response. It is, simply put, an evolutionary leap that has created a new form of humanity. The technical details about the machines that brought this about remain untouched, aside from the image of the pods containing the scientists and the EEG-like electrodes attached to their heads. And while I agree that a deeper explanation of the machinery behind this process would be more than fascinating, I also believe its absence does not diminish the experience. What matters is that transition, that is, the transcendence, has taken place. What is confusing, however, is the issue of the zone's expansion, which must be sought in subtext. For example, the barkeeper relays a rumor that every time the Wish-Granter answers someone's prayers, the zone expands by 5 kilometers. Of course, based on Strelok's fate when approaching the Wish-Granter, we see that sometimes he disappears, sometimes he is absorbed as energy, and sometimes he dies, so it remains unclear what exactly is happening. Moreover, we are told by a representative of the sea consciousness that their intention is to prevent further expansion of the zone. The existence of the Wish-Granter as a bait, luring the curious to fuel the zone's growth, is therefore at odds with what they claim, especially given that we know it is their creation. Naturally, we have no reason to trust them, particularly given the fact that they operate from the shadows and willingly enslave and mentally condition stalkers. This is followed by warnings about the expansion of the zone in Duty's propaganda, which in itself is countered by the random discussions of its members questioning this narrative. Yet, judging by the Stalker 2 trailer Enter the Zone, it seems that it is in fact expanding. Be that as it may, if we accept the concept of the Omega Point, the supposed endpoint of the evolutionary path, which for Teilhard de Chardin is synonymous with God, we can observe that the sea consciousness in its transcendent form satisfies the defining characteristics of that concept. First, it is autonomous, not simply the product of evolution, but a magnetic force that redirects the spontaneous development of life and humanity into a consciously constructed evolutionary path. Mutated creatures, mind control, and the phase transition, all of these are evolutionary phenomena, but as the result of human interference rather than the will of Mother Nature or divine intention. Second, the sea consciousness is actual, no longer just an idea of the ultimate intelligence, but the ultimate intelligence itself, shaping events within the zone. It is the puppet master behind the scenes, steering lives either directly, as in the case of the Monolith soldiers, or indirectly through environmental manipulation. Third, the transition from physical to transcendent existence is irreversible, unidirectional. No matter how often people speak of destroying the zone, it never happens. Even the destruction of the group's capsules changes nothing. Although we see Strelok lying in the grass and enjoying the comfort of a regular reality, Call of Pripyat shows us that there is no going back. Finally, the sea consciousness transcends the physical laws as we know them and exists within a reality that lies beyond our comprehension. Space-time distortions in which stalkers disappear, the conclusion that the scientists are somewhere else, emissions and wormholes that serve as teleportational anomalies, as well as anomalies in general, all of this tells us that sea consciousness is a completely new reality beyond the coordinates we are used to, which seeks to shape evolution, that is, with the phase transition, people are no longer just its product, but become its creators. From our narrow perspective, this transcendent mind appears as a god in the making, seemingly capable of commanding the skies and the earth. And yet, as impressive as the leap may seem, our conversation with its representative reveals that the zone is, in fact, a mistake rather than intention, and that life, though at a higher level, remains just that, life. This confirms that even a supposed deity, like everything else, can only be defined relatively and referentially. Thus, God from our perspective may be no more than an ant from the vantage point of a higher deity. The sea consciousness, the creator of the zone, the mighty source of energy surges that set the skies ablaze and make the ground tremble, appears scattered in its efforts to control the noosphere, incapable of stopping even a well-organized network of agents from reaching the heart of this alien world and discovering the pods that hold the scientists. The omega point of Homo sapiens' evolution is nothing more than the alpha point of a new world inhabited by the successors of its species. The two are in truth one and the same, and all ideas about the final station on the evolutionary path fall apart, while the path itself stretches on into infinity. This inverts the perspective. In contrast to the orthogenetic vision in which evolutionary development is seen as a progression driven by some inner, a priori force or logic, we are presented with humans who, by creating ideas and narratives about the existence of a goal or logic in development, undertake actions that operate like self-fulfilling prophecies. Through their ideas, they generate the inner force of progression. By speaking of a deity as Alpha and Omega, they step out of the stream of aimless, random evolution and enter the space of creation, becoming themselves a kind of pseudo-god, the beginning and the end of a new evolutionary current, the ultimate will or intelligence. We can even draw a parallel with the evolutionary continuity emphasized in the segment dedicated to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and suggest that the intellectual montage, from the shot of a bone being thrown into the air to that of the spacecraft floating through cosmos, finds its counterpart in the passage through the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which leads us to the capsules containing the members of the group. Both are tools through which humanity seeks to assert control over earthly forces and ease the burden of existence, and both represent forces that ultimately slip from its grasp due to its own inherent weaknesses, however we choose to interpret them. And it is precisely this new being that creates the zone, grim, convoluted, deadly, yet full of wonder and potential. It creates it in its own image, for how can one create a world without paradox or evil when both dwell within us? We have already seen this in the section devoted to the clans and in the film's commentary, where the guide notes that the human mind is the catalyst for anomalies. Even at that level of cognitive and technological development, the idealized divine height remains beyond reach. But how is that possible? Although the equation becomes more complex here, the answer remains essentially the same as in the previous chapter. With the development of reflective thought, man becomes aware of good and evil. On the other hand, by transcending physical existence, he becomes immortal, or so it seems given Strelok's failure to destroy the sea consciousness. Yet one aspect of the divine formula remains inaccessible to him: the ability to always choose good over evil. This remains impossible even when transcendence overcomes the earlier mentioned issues of differing interpretations of the same ideals, verbalization of ideas, and coordination of actions.